Hey everybody, I'm excited to show you the last part of my Lox program. So the previous 3 iterations I have been adding it so it accesses the keyring on each operating system. Started with Mac, then went to Windows, and then Linux. And now I've added some features such that if you wanted to, you could use Lox to be a capture the flag tool as long as you could get a victim to run it as their user, because the keyring is typically locked per user, so you would need to get them to run it as them and enter their password somehow or whatever they use to log into the system. But anyway, if you can find a way to bypass that or get them to run it, then you're in business. So I've added a lot of stuff. So this works on all 3 operating systems. I'll start with Mac. So the first one is a command that I've built Lox already on Windows. So there's 2 commands. The first is called list, and this will list everything that is in the keyring without asking permission. It can bypass it. It doesn't need to because it's not pulling out the actual secrets. So all it's doing is it just looks up the key name in the keyring, like so. So right now I'm only having it pull out 2 different types. So on a Mac, you have what's called generic passwords or internet passwords, but I could also pull out certificates, encryption keys, identity files, whatever. And this is how Mac tags it. So for example, airport is the service that's actually the Wi-Fi on Mac. And I want it to, these are all my Wi-Fi stuff. Those are all being stored in the keyring, or at least that's where Mac usually puts them. So list is obviously just giving me a name. Now, let's say I wanted to look at what is actually there. So I added a command called peek. And what it does is it uses a filtering mechanism based on these various attributes. So here's the attribute name and here's the attribute value. So let's look at my phone, because I tether to my phone sometimes. So the attribute is account, and I'm actually going to have to wrap this in quotes because there's a space. All right, I might have to do a backslash. But anyway, so the account is Mike's phone, and the service is airport. And you see it's asking, if you want to pull out the value, you need to enter your password because this is my base operating system. Therefore, I've got it locked down so that anytime it accesses that stuff, it requires my password. And there it is. It just pulled it right out. And there's some other things I could pull out as well. But if I don't supply enough arguments on a Mac, it will barf at me and complain. Oh, actually, if I don't enter anything, it'll try to pull everything out. But let's say, for example, I just wanted to figure out what, using the last example, or even another one. Let's try this Netgear 40. Let's say I just did account equals Netgear, sorry. Well, anyway, you can see it says you didn't supply enough because a Mac requires more than that to do a search. But let's say I just wanted to dump absolutely everything. I just do peek and I don't give it any arguments. Now, every time it wants to pull something out, I have to enter a password. And this is extremely painful, so I'm not going to sit here for 45 minutes and let you guys watch me type my password over and over and over again because you've got better things to do. So I'm just going to cancel. So the only thing it pulled out at that time was this. So whatever this was, entitlements, unique key, was under the comms. Anyway, pulled it out, which was nothing more than a GUID, but maybe that GUID is important. I'm not entirely sure. But let's look at something more interesting. So here's something I might consider pulling out. There's this Apple global setup authentication token. So that's interesting, and it's on my behalf. So if I go back here, I type in the service is that big long thing. The account is somehow it's tied to that. Now it's asking me to enter and pull it out. And this one must be really important because it's making me type it twice. Oh, but there it is. It pulled it right out. It's a base 64 encoded value. So Apple, despite your best efforts to hide it, I have managed to pull it out. This was actually by far the hardest thing to do was on Mac. So in my liblox repo and Rust, these are the OS key rings. So one for Linux, Mac, and Windows, and it only compiles the one that's needed for that OS. It doesn't make sense to compile Linux for Mac or Windows and so on. But anyway, Mac, Apple was not clear on how to use some libraries called the security framework, and then I had to dive into Core Foundation. So I encourage you to look at that, as I'm not going to go into those, but that was a pain in the butt to search those. Apple doesn't document that very well, and I had to pull some tricks to sneak the things out of the keyring, but I was able to do it. And then Linux was slightly easier because the tool already supports pulling everything out of the keyring, and I didn't need to do anything fancy. I just had for list secrets, just get all the items, pull them out, and away you go. And for peek, if you don't supply any filters, then it just assumes you want everything and pulled out. Otherwise, it tries to filter it based on the attributes. And then on Windows, believe it or not, has a nice flag that you set called enumerate all credentials. So assuming I'm logged in as that user, and then it will enumerate everything that that user has access to in the keyring. So that was nice. I just said pull everything out, and then Windows already provides some filtering mechanisms, which was really good by globbing, and each kind of OS has their own way of filtering. So I'll show you that here in a second. So let's go to my Linux box, where I've already compiled Lox to do the same thing. And so as you can see, I can go list, and it just pulls them right out. And then I can go peek, and it'll pull everything out and the values that they have. So this right here on Linux, the keyring values are tagged by attributes, similar to a Mac. I mean, as we saw here, that these were the attributes. Account is one attribute. There's the value. This is the kind. It's a generic password, not an internet password. Service is another attribute with this value. But not all attribute or not all things on a Mac were generics. There could have been internet passwords. I'm not seeing any off the top of my head. This one obviously didn't have very much. But anyway, on a Linux, they're very similar. So that's the attribute. So if I only want to pull one where the service equals indie, for example, there it goes. It pulls it right out, as you saw right here. Or I could say pull out all the secrets for my user, and it pulls them right out. So that's good on Linux. So it's the exact same thing that you saw before. It's just on Linux. And this one wasn't as tricky to implement, but Linux does do some different things. So had to implement it for that. And now if I go look at my Windows machine, you'll see it'll do the exact same thing where I can pull stuff out, give me a list of everything I have access to. Oh, there it is. And you notice that on Windows, everything's based on kind of a target name. That's how the credentialing system works. List doesn't filter anything, but peek will. So peek, for example, will pull out everything. And in this case, this was a value that Lox put in there, which is actually encrypted. So unless Lox knows it's managing that secret, it wouldn't be able to decrypt it. So thank you, Windows. I did some similar things on Mac and Linux. So if Lox is managing the keyring secret, it actually does some encryption techniques. So even if someone were using Lox to peek at it, they couldn't see what the actual value is. So if you remember how this works, so in this case, I know Lox is managing it, so I can pull it out and get the actual value. But when I peek at it, it's this big, long hex blob, which I can't read. So that's not helpful. So Lox will save you from being snooped if you want to use it for your keyring, which is really cool. So in this case, Windows, when you want to search, for example, it bases it off of this target equals, and then unless you type the whole thing, it won't find it. So you'll go, wait a minute, what are you doing? But Windows permits globbing, so if I do that, then it finds it. So anyway, that's some fancy stuff. It wasn't easy to get Windows to work either, even though it did provide this flag. Their documentation on how to call the right function and what to pass it, because it's all C in this, and I use Rust, which is similar to C, but it's different enough that it took me quite a while to think about how to do this right. So anyway, that's it for Lox. The repo is online. Feel free to use it and attack people or guard your own stuff. So Lox is meant for that, to help you manage your secrets. And here's the command line tool portion. And if you don't want to use my command line, but you just want to access the raw stuff, I've implemented the everything you saw there in each of these to be called over a C callable API. So you could wrap it with Python, Perl, PHP, or C Sharp, Java. Pick your favorite language, doesn't matter. Everything that can use a C callable API can use Lox. So that's pretty cool. Or if you want to use Rust and learn Rust, you're welcome to. But anyway, because it is Rust, it compiles to a C callable library. So let me show you what I mean by that. So if I go in here, you should see in release mode, there's two files. See, it makes me a .sso, and it also makes the executable and the .a file. So if you want to statically link against Lox or dynamically link against it, or just run the program that you saw me do, where it goes, what do you want? It's just a command line wrapper around Lox. So that's it for Lox for now. There's lots of cool places that I can go with this, and I'm going to continue to keep developing it to use other keyrings besides the OS keyrings like HashiCorp Vault or Amazon's Cloud HSM or things like that. Then or 1Password or LastPass. But in those cases, you would have to supply a password similar to how I have to go on a Mac. It's just then it's out of your hands and how those other systems manage it. So you could basically use Lox as your one gateway for every password manager that it supports, and it will do it in an easy to use manner because the backend doesn't matter. Lox is configurable, so I might add a -- keyring feature to it, and then you could also use it to attack those very things. So anyway, that's it for now.